So I love that we're educating Dr. James about baseball today. So continuing with that theme, Dr. James, I would be what's known as the closer who sometimes does a blown save when the incredible starting pitcher, holds the lead and then the middle reliever comes in. The team is still winning. Sometimes the final guy comes in and it all falls apart at that point. So that's what might happen here. But I mean, I always think that a good talk starts with, relating something vulnerable where you don't necessarily look great. And Thor, I know you made that whole story up, but it really worked for this talk. That whole fetal position with the daughter thing, wow. And Kevin, what you said about parental expectations, I'm going to end up cannibalizing some of that because I'm also talking about that. But it's cool when Dr. James asked us all to speak, I could show you the email. I think we all have the email where he said, 10 minutes each, guys, okay? 10 minutes? All right, I'm like, that seems a little long, but okay. So all week long, I'm working, I'm coming up with what I'm going to say. I'm like, how do I fill 10 minutes? But I eventually figure it all out, and I'm feeling pretty secure, right? And then yesterday, I get the follow-up email from Dr. Tiffany the day before saying, just a reminder, you three, keep it to 5 minutes tomorrow. Wait a minute, 5 minutes? So I'm going to talk at double speed, and you're all going to keep up with it. So first, I want to make sure I tell you about this book that's been kind of influential on me. That you don't hear about this book very much on this stage, but some people really like it. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon. It's called The Bible. I think it's Bible, I want to say, and I'm not really sure who wrote it, but I think it's one of those anthologies maybe where different people wrote different parts. But it tells this really cool story of this father guy who created everything. He created the universe, he created the planets and the people and the animals and the ocean, all that. And he's kind of this chill dude who'll do stuff for you sometimes if you just ask him and do what he says, say your enemies are chasing you and there's a body of water, he'll part the water, you run across and then he drowns them afterwards, right? Archie loves it. Yeah, so or there's this story where he drops food from the sky for no apparent reason, and it tastes terrible, but it keeps you alive if you're find yourself wandering in the desert for some reason. So but he does have this other side to him, which is a little aggro and kind of do what I say and follow everything I tell you to do or I'm going to punish you in these really colorful and detailed ways. And gets a little intense at times. So anyway, I read this book a lot as a kid, or actually it was read to me at this place called a church by these men who were known as Catholic priests. I don't think they exist anymore because a lot of them did some really bad things, but I haven't followed the news on it lately. But and I think it really set the tone for me about not only what created the earth and how are we supposed to be and what's our job here, but also what a father is. Because I think fathers we kind of think of as having these two sides, which I think Kevin alluded to a little bit of the loving provider who's going to give to you and guide you and direct you and help you. And then the guy that's going to set the tough rules and the tough expectations and tell you be a certain way, my way or the highway, follow what I say you should do and be. And, I was lucky in that my father was more the first one. He was a very kind of kind, good-hearted, easygoing kind of guy. And I'm extremely grateful that I grew up with a nuclear family that supported me and loved me. Not that nuclear is better, but I just had the two parents and the sibling and a stable home and was provided for and supported in how I wanted to be, whatever that was ultimately, which is great. But I will say my father came from a certain tradition of of masculine values from his era, of growing up in the Depression and World War II, and he was a working class guy who didn't go to college, who was strived into the middle class. The normal ideas of what a man was kind of what was imparted to me, not necessarily verbally, but kind of just subconsciously. And being good at sports was one of those things. And so I grew up as a little boy, really wanted to be good at sports. And this is going to shock you guys, I think. But as a child, I wasn't really that athletic. And I don't know why people are laughing. It's just It's just kind of a sad story, really. No, but I was kind of a brainy kid who was like very sensitive, and I didn't feel like I had those qualities that my dad imparted of like, you're tough and you don't have fear and you get things done and you're, this man's man masculine ideal. And so, the good news is I eventually, found my own way and found my people and create a life and where I could succeed in terms of my own desires of how I want to succeed. But the question is, to what extent do I carry around with me on some level that sense of I didn't quite measure up or I don't quite measure up? And on the religion side, too, with that Catholic father figure that I was raised with, do I really measure up to everything he said I was supposed to be? And some of what he said I wasn't all that appealing either, or I couldn't quite be. And so I think there's a part of me, and maybe you guys relate to this, that carries around some of that stuff, even though consciously you're like, no, I've moved on, and I'm this other thing, and I believe in these other things. And, eventually I found this teaching, which kind of has the good parts of that God figure without the bad parts in some ways. The good parts being, you can get what you want and you just have to believe, but it's all very kind of upbeat and positive. And you don't have the bad parts of the punishment. But the other thing, though, is you don't have this person, this being that you can just appeal to because it's all within yourself. It's all within your own mind. And the way you access that fatherly love has to do with what you're doing with your mind. And you have the responsibility to do that work. And if you don't do that work, you may be stuck in a place where you're not really feeling like that God energy is parting the Red Sea for you and raining down manna from heaven. So, what I've noticed is that it's daily work, it's spiritual practice to really try to get into that mindset, because the normal human mindset, as Abraham says, wants to pinch off that divine source with negative, unloving, limited, judging, unforgiving kind of thinking. And so my daily practice, my daily job seems to be to recognize that there's another level of consciousness that isn't the one I walk around in as a default state that is available to me, and to practice that state of consciousness. What I mean by default state is, I don't know about you, but in my daily life, it's very easy to just be caught up in the sense of I'm a limited, separate, vulnerable, finite human being who doesn't have access to everything he wants, and who, has this body that's fragile and this limited lifespan and just limitation. And it takes work to say there's something else that I can come at life from besides that perspective. And to recognize that there is this loving Father presence that is available, who really gets me, who really loves me, who really provides for me, but it isn't this separate being, it's this greater energy that I am made of and that I can access. So it's kind of like I have to force myself to switch gears into that mindset of, in a way, it's like being a father to myself and my own thinking. Like there's the child part of me that's the vulnerable, limited, separate self, and then there's the father side that I kind of go back and forth between in a way. And so, Dr. James recently taught this book, Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach, in a class that many of us took. I was the one that recommended the book to him, by the way. So, she has a great phrase in there called being the holder and the held. And she's coming from a Buddhist perspective. She's a psychotherapist and meditation teacher, but the idea being that you can be the child that needs to be held, and you can also be the father, the parent, the divine self that can hold that child. You can do that at the same time. And since we don't believe in that God out there that's going to do it, it's kind of our job to be the holder of ourselves at the same time as being the held. And one of the challenges in that, for me, is that I recognize that, and there's so that's kind of like two personas. There's actually kind of a third persona living within me, which is this judging voice this, the negative side of the God voice maybe, which I don't know if it's because the human brain has a negativity bias where we tend to look for problems and we tend to notice and focus on problems more than the good stuff. Have you all noticed that you do this, or that we all do this? Because it's a thing. But there's a voice in me that kind of wants to say, you didn't do that well, you didn't measure up, play small, be worried about what's going to happen, make sure all your ducks are in a row, and be careful because there's problems out there. And that voice is also knocking at the door of my consciousness most of the time, trying to keep me in that sort of more limited mindset. So just like that child human voice, it doesn't have the final say. And I don't have to listen to it, but I also know that resisting it doesn't help. Resisting it, calling it wrong, wishing it wasn't there, being upset that it's talking, or that little child is talking who feels so vulnerable, resisting it doesn't help. Loving it, allowing it, accepting it is what seems to work for me, while deciding to go to that higher place, deciding to seek and find that higher place. And so on this Father's Day, that's what I wish for all of you, as well as I do for myself, that you can find that loving Father voice within, live more and more from that voice, and see things from its point of view, to parent the child in whom it is always very well pleased. That's you, and that's me. Namaste.